Hello and welcome to Dianna's Writing Desk, where we discuss everything to do with writing, independent publishing, books, creativity, as well as general observations of life. All the world is a stage. Information about this podcast and a list of upcoming episodes, as well as all of my books, can be found on my website, diannahardy.com. Hello everyone, welcome to episode 4 of this podcast show. What I'm going to talk about today is writing sex scenes into fiction. Writing hopefully good sex scenes into fiction and leaning towards explicit sex if that is what you want to write into your fiction. I just want to start by saying that this particular episode is going to be suitable for everybody. I'm not going to go into detail on the podcast. I'm not going to use challenging words or anything like that. So don't worry about that. It's okay for everyone to listen to, but just bear in mind, obviously, the nature of the topic means that we are just going to talk about sex and talk about erotic scenes and talk about the difference between writing that into mainstream fiction and writing it as erotica, because there is a difference between the two. So the subject matter is for more mature listeners, but the actual content I'm not going to go into detail, all right? So it's perfectly safe for you to listen. So what I'm going to be talking about is based on what I've learned over the years, really. It's based on what I've picked up from other authors or from online forums when I was first researching and studying so that I could write what I wanted to write. And it's based on the past 10 years actually writing my fiction as well. And just to say, I don't pretend that my particular sex scenes are all that, okay? I'm not necessarily saying that they're like the best out there or anything like that. I like them. I think they're good. I think that if I felt they were bad, I wouldn't be able to write them, but that's not really what I'm focusing on. What I'm focusing on is what I've learned, and I want to bring what I've learned and my experiences based on what I've learned to you. So let's talk first about the difference between writing explicit sex scenes into what could be termed more mainstream fiction or genre fiction and writing erotica, or what is specifically meant to be erotic fiction, because there is a difference between the two. And I think that this is key. This difference is fundamental to you getting the right state of mind and intent for writing the scenes that you want to write. When you are writing erotica, or to some extent literary erotica, or erotic fiction where the emphasis is on erotica and the erotic, then what you're doing when you write that is every step of the way, with every scene that you're writing, what you're thinking is this going to arouse the reader? Is this going to titillate the reader? It sort of, in many ways, doesn't matter what the plot is, and it doesn't matter necessarily what exactly the characters are doing. What matters first and foremost is the reader going to be aroused by this? Because that is the purpose of erotica. When you are writing mainstream fiction or genre fiction, what you are focusing on first and foremost is the genre itself, and then whatever plot or drama or storyline or characterization is going on within the fiction that you're writing. And any explicit sex scenes that you put in there has to come from the place where you're thinking, is what I'm writing what the characters should be doing? Is it going to suit the characters? Is it true to what they're thinking? Is it true to what they're feeling? And to that end, you also have to ask yourself, what is the reason for that particular sex scene? What is the reason for that explicitness? What is it going to drive forward? Another way to think about it is, if you're writing erotica, then the sex is what drives the plot. So you could get rid of the plot completely and it wouldn't matter. The sex would still be there and the story would serve its purpose. When you're writing explicit sex scenes into other fiction, the plot has to drive the sex. So even without the sex scenes, the story would still make sense. The plot would still make sense. You would still be able to, drive it forward in some other way. but the explicit sex scenes would then just add to the story in the way that you wanted to add to the story, and add perhaps layers of depth to that particular scene, to the emotions the characters are going through, or whatever it might be. So that is a huge fundamental difference between the two types of fiction, and it's important to understand that because it sets your intent as a writer. Once you have that difference set in your mind, the writing of whatever you need to write actually becomes much more easy. The other thing to bear in mind, I think, that's quite important is that, well, there are two main things, and I'm moving on now to talking about genre fiction and just more generalized fiction and writing explicit sex scenes into those, whether they're explicit or not. The first thing is this right for the characters? That's what you need to be thinking. Does this suit the characters? Is this where the characters need to go in order for them to transform or evolve, or for you to get a point across to your readers that you think is very important for the following scenes that are going to come? So that's the first question you need to ask yourself before you write any kind of intimate scene. And once you have the answer to that, again, what you're doing is you're accessing the truth of the situation and the story with that answer. And once you have the truth, it's much, much easier to write, especially if you're somebody who feels a bit nervous about writing these kinds of intimate scenes. And a lot of people do, you know, a lot of people might want to actually take their characters to some of these places, but actually feel a little bit uncomfortable, doing it inside. So that's the first thing to ask yourself is this suitable for the characters? The second thing that I think is important to be aware of is the explicitness or potential explicitness, the intimacy that you want to write, suitable for the genre? So first of all, ask if it's suitable for the characters, then ask if it's suitable for the genre. Now, the second question about whether it's suitable for the genre should actually be easier to answer, because hopefully you're already writing characters that are suitable for your genre. So if the scenes that you want to write are already suitable for the characters, they should already be suitable for the genre. But nevertheless, it's still important to take yourself back to that question, because different genres do lend themselves to different kinds of explicitness. For example, I'm a very emotionally explicit writer. I like to write explicitness. Yes, I do write explicit sex scenes, but they come from a very emotional place. When I'm writing those scenes for the people who have read my books, for the readers, you will know that they tend to be very emotional scenes, even if they're dark, even if it's actually the villains having the scenes, for example. I'm almost always delving into the emotions, the thoughts, and the psychology that the characters are feeling and working through while those particular scenes are taking place. And often, because I write paranormal and fantasy and supernatural creatures and so on, very transformative, possibly even out of this world things can happen during an explicit sex scene, or what I like to call a raw sex scene, because the rawness comes through the explicitness that I like to put into the emotions that the characters are going through. I think that's really important for my writing. That's in most of my books at some point or another, even if there's only one scene in there, the emotions and the thought forms, the psychology, the transformation that the characters are going through, and what they manage to essentially release within themselves or work through in those scenes are pivotal to where they move to next as a person. And sometimes it also just moves that story to the next place in terms of, especially with paranormal or fantasy, what can take place next in the scenes and the actions that the characters are about to take that will make much more sense than if that explicit scene, that I had written before hadn't happened. Is it suitable for your genre? If, for example, you're writing from a male's point of view and that man is perhaps a slightly more closed off, uptight doctor or policeman or lawyer, just someone who thinks very analytically and is very maybe abiding to his principles and his rules and so on, then he's going to have a very different journey going into any kind of explicit sexual or intimate situation than another person who is more creative, who is a dancer, who is, an expressive person, an artist, whatever it might be. You're going to have to describe those things very, very differently depending on who your characters are and also what the genre is. So, these are kind of all things to bear in mind, and you tend to bear these things in mind more if you are writing explicitness or intimacy in mainstream fiction or genre fiction. If you're writing erotica, then those questions, they can certainly come into the equation, but they tend to be secondary. They're secondary questions, because the main question that you're asking yourself if you're writing erotica all the time is this arousing for the reader? Because that is essentially why the reader's paid for the book. Once you're sure of the answer to all of those questions, the actual writing of the scene shouldn't really be a problem, because you are in your characters' heads and you are literally feeling what they're feeling, and you're writing what they are naturally pulling you towards writing. Essentially, my advice usually is go where the characters want to take you, because the characters just kind of know, especially if you've written them in a well-rounded way and you're very familiar with them already and you know them inside out. Trust your characters to take you where they want to go. And if you do that, they may surprise you, but trust that surprising aspect, because if you don't like it, if it turns out it's not right, you can just delete it. It doesn't matter. But experiment with it and let them take you where they want to take you, because you may find that it actually adds to the story in a way that you maybe wouldn't have realized if you'd allowed your maybe more analytical side of your brain to get in there and, start to direct you. Let the characters flow out of you when you're writing scenes like this, because they will be true to themselves. They'll be true to what they want. One of the things to bear in mind with any scene that you write, no matter the genre, no matter the context, is if the scene stirs the right feelings in you that you are trying to get across, whether that's anger, love, jealousy, arousal, anything else, if it stirs the right feelings in you and you are immersed in that story as you're reading it, then you have likely written it right. You have done a good job. And that same rule applies to explicit scenes and or erotica as well. Actually, if you're writing erotica, if the feeling is the right one and you have been transported through that writing, you have done a good job. Now, of course, not every single reader is going to be on the same page with everything. That's just because everyone's different. There are 8 billion people in the world and everybody has different experiences, thinks differently about personal, intimate things and so on. So let that go, because you're never going to be able to control that. All you need to worry about is whether when you're reading it, and perhaps your best fans, the ones who really get your story and your writing, if they also read it and they're transported to the right place, then you've done a good job. Okay, you've written it well. So don't worry about that so much. And lastly, never forget that what your characters go through in any scene, but also especially in very intimate and intense scenes like explicit sex scenes, for example, where the emotions are very real and are very raw. And if they go through something intense or transformative, don't forget to move that character forward to the place they're supposed to be in. And don't forget in the scenes that follow that character is in that new place and needs to approach whatever happens next from that new perspective. That's very important. And I could go into the other more basic aspects of writing such scenes, like, stay away from purple prose where you're being over dramatic or maybe a little bit too flowery with your language. I think that goes without saying. You should be avoiding purple prose anyway, I think, in any kind of scene, unless the person is in a very, very specific place or that kind of language is part of their character specifically. Then you want to avoid purple prose. You want to avoid repetitive words, okay? So using the word knickers, because I'm British and we say knickers rather than panties, generally speaking, you want to avoid putting the word knickers in every, paragraph. You don't want it to appear 3 times on one page. You really want to find a different word, and even if you're substituting it for briefs or panties, because sometimes we say panties too over this side of the pond. So you want to be thinking about those kind of things, but I don't want to talk about those aspects so much because I think they're obvious. They're the ones that everybody knows. Everybody knows to look out for that kind of stuff, but not everybody is necessarily thinking about their writing on those deeper layers where they're thinking about their characters, where they're thinking about the transformative aspects of what they're writing, where they're thinking about how it moves everything to the next place, and so on and so on. And I think that's incredibly important for good sex scenes, specifically sex scenes, because they are intense, intimate and personal. It's important to be thinking about those things clearly before you write those scenes. And like I said, when you do think about those things clearly, you're very much accessing the truth of your characters and the truth of that scene. And once you have that truth inside you very clearly seen and aligned with, then the writing of that scene should, in my personal experience, flow much more easily. And really, you'll probably find you don't really need to give it too much thought as long as you've got the answers to those questions that I laid out at the beginning of this episode. Ask yourself those questions, be really sure of those answers, and then just go for it with regards to writing the scenes, because that truth of those answers and what you feel with your characters, that is really what's going to make the scene very real for anybody who's reading it. That's what's going to make it make sense. It's what's going to make them align with it, and it's what's going to make them comfortable with it, if they're supposed to be comfortable with it. Sometimes you write explicitness to show something that isn't nice, to show something that isn't comfortable, to show something that the reader is supposed to be repulsed at. So bear that in mind as well. What it is that you're trying to get across has always got to be at the forefront of your mind when you're writing those things. And if you really get inside your characters and access the truth of what they're doing and how they're doing it, then it will. Readers will get it. Readers will understand. They will align with your words. So I would say, above and beyond, those are the most important aspects to think about when writing explicit sex scenes into your fiction. And when writing intimate scenes and very emotional scenes into your fiction, those are the things that you need to be thinking of. So I hope that's helped you. If you are on the verge of writing one of those scenes yourself, have a think about that, try it out, see if it works, ask yourself those questions, write down your answers if you need to, and just go for it and let me know. Let me know if anything that I've said here is new to you. It might not be new to you, and you might already have thought about all of this and tried it this way. If it is new to you, let me know if it's worked, if it's helped you in any way. Thank you so much for listening. In the next episode, I'm going to be talking about the beauty of writing werewolves and shifters and other paranormal creatures, and writing paranormal, supernatural and fantasy beings in general. All the things I love about it and what you can really do with those characters. So tune in next week if you're interested in that. Have a lovely week, and I'll see you soon.